You know all those quilts that you have folded up and stored away in closets and cabinets and under your bed and in every nook and cranny that you have? Well, I'm here to tell you that if you're not folding them on the bias, you're doing a huge disservice to those one-of-a-kind heirlooms that you've created. After all the time and money that you spent making those beautiful quilts, why not go one extra step and do your very best in order to protect them and preserve them by folding them on the bias before you store them away? It's quick and easy, and literally anybody can do it. Hi, I'm Shelly, and I'm a long arm quilter and a quilter, and probably just like you do, I have more quilts in my possession than my family can ever use at one time, which means that I've got lots of them folded up and stashed away for future use. And you had better believe that I take the time to fold up every single one of them on the bias before I tuck them away. I also do this with every single quilt that I'm returning to a long arming client through the mail. In this video, I'm going to explain to you why I do that and why I think you probably should be too, and then I'm going to show you how you can do it even if you have very limited space in your home. So if you're ready to dive into the exciting world of quilt folding, let's get to it. Here I've got a typical stack of quilts like I would expect to see in almost any quilter's home. But most of the time when I see stacks of quilts like this, I know, or at least I suspect, that they were folded straight of grain. What does that mean? That means that if I handed a quilt to someone, let's say it's a rectangular quilt, I hand it to them and ask them to fold it up and put it away for storage, most people are going to fold that so that the long edges touch each other, or so that the top and bottom edges touch each other, and then keep making it into a smaller rectangle until they've got a nice size rectangle that they can store away for future use. Makes sense, right? That is how you would fold up a blanket. That's how you would fold up a sheet. It's just what normal people would do. But there is a problem with that method. And that is that those folds have been made along the straight of grain. What does that mean? Well, think about fabric that you buy in yardage. So if you buy fabric off of a bolt from a quilt shop, they're going to cut off the bolt and then give it to you. You're going to take it home, and then you're going to unfold it, and you're going to need to press it, because you know for a fact there's going to be a really harsh crease where the fabric was folded in half so that the selvage edges were touching before it was wrapped around a bolt. And that crease is really hard to get out because it was made parallel or perpendicular to the fibers that were woven to make up the fabric. So we want to avoid folding our quilts like that, because if you do fold them like that, over time, those fibers are going to weaken and you could potentially be causing damage or holes to your quilts. So what can you do instead? Instead, you can fold them on the bias. So if you were to talk to a quilt archivist or a quilt librarian or someone who is in charge of storing quilts, they would tell you that folding it on the bias is going to preserve and prolong the life of your quilt. And all that means is that instead of starting with a rectangle and then folding it into smaller rectangles, you're going to make some diagonal folds. And those diagonal folds are going to release much easier than those folds that you would make that were perpendicular to the grain of fabric or parallel to the grain of fabric. So these ones were all folded on the bias. It's not hard to do. It doesn't take up a lot of room, and it really does help save the life of your quilt. It's also a really great idea to do if you are sending your finished quilt away to a quilt show. We should all be so lucky, am I right? But I know that when I go to quilt shows, I often see quilts that are hanging there that have really harsh creases in them, and I just kind of want to go, no. Because a lot of times the people that put shows on don't press or steam or do anything to the quilts that they receive. They just simply hang them up and then show them to the public. And if you have folded your quilt in the normal way, those harsh creases are still going to be there when everyone from the public comes and looks at your quilt. So instead, if you take just a couple minutes to fold your quilt on the bias, when they go to hang it up, those wrinkles and those creases are going to release a lot easier, and that quilt is going to be much flatter when people come to look at it. This is also a really great technique to use if you are sending a quilt away to a long armor. So even if you're folding it up to bring to them, or you're folding it up to put in a parcel to put in the mail to them, this is a great technique to use, because if your long armor receives your backing fabric or your quilt top and it has those really harsh creases in it, they're probably going to want to press it before they load it on their machine and start working on it. So in order to save your long armor time and effort, and in order to protect your quilt, you might want to try folding it on the bias. So when you're ready, I'll take you over to my living room and I'll show you just how fast and easy it is to do. Coming to you live from my living room floor, I'm all set to fold my quilt on the bias. Two things. If you don't have a big space like this in your living room, that's fine. You can do this by placing your quilt on a bed. That works really well because you can get around to almost all four sides of it. Number two, I have my quilt with the piecing facing down. And I'm doing that so that when I fold it up, the piecing will be on the outside of the parcel. And that means that when I put it on my shelf, I can actually tell which quilt is which. Because if I folded them up the other way and the backing fabric was facing out, I mean, I don't know about you, but I do not remember what fabrics I put on the backs of my quilts. So if I want to know which quilt I'm looking at, I need the piecing to be on the outside. So that means I'm going to start with the piecing facing down. And the first thing I'm going to do is pick up the bottom right-hand corner and fold it towards the middle of the quilt. And this is now a bias fold. So when we say fold it on the bias, this is exactly what we mean. See how it's diagonal to the edges of the quilt? That means that this fold right here, after it's been sitting for a while, this fold is gonna come out really easily, unlike those super harsh creases. And when I fold up this corner, I'm looking for two things. Number one, I want this angle right here to be approximately 45 degrees. Nobody's coming with a protractor, but you know what I mean, you just want it to be about 45 degrees. Number two, this corner, I usually bring past the halfway point of the top of the quilt. It would be a different story if you folded it like this. You'd have a different fold in the end, so I just pick it up and make sure that it at least reaches halfway. And I want this top edge right here to be parallel with the top of the quilt. And sometimes you might have quilting lines that might help you accomplish that. So I'm just gonna tug on this quilt to make sure that it's kind of parallel with these quilting lines right here. So that was step one, lift up the bottom right-hand corner. Step number two is to pull in the bottom left-hand corner. And I'm gonna do the same thing where I'm just gonna pull this point right here, somewhere past the middle. It doesn't matter how far you pull it. And I want two things. I want these edges to be touching each other, and I want this edge right here to be parallel with the top of the quilt. Because I've got those two things going on, I can move on to step number three, which is to fold in the top right-hand corner. And when I do that, I'm going to pull it over, and the two things I'm looking for right here are for these edges to be touching, and I want this fold right here to be parallel with this fold over here. And I can see I just need to tug that in just a little bit. And you can also see that I've got this flippy flappy right here that's extending past the edge of my previous fold. That's no problem. I have two choices. I can either tuck it in like this, or I could fold it under. And I just prefer to fold it under. I don't know why, it doesn't matter, but that's what I like to do. So that was step three. And then we need to go grab the top left-hand corner and pull that in. And when we do that, same thing. Our folded edges right here should be touching each other, and this folded edge should be touching. At this point, you should have something that looks like a rectangle. And if you have, congratulations, you're halfway there. Now we just need to take this rectangle and fold it into a smaller rectangle so it's going to fit on our shelves. And depending on how far you have pulled it in, like if you only pulled it into there, you might want to fold this 3 times. And if you folded it more, you might only fold it twice. And then from here, I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to fold it one last time so that I've got myself a nice, neat little parcel that I can put on my shelf. And I know that the way that I have folded this has protected it. So I'm going to extend the longevity of my quilt because I spent so much time and money making it that I want it to live its best life forever. Let me know in the comments below if you are already folding your quilts on the bias or if you're planning to start doing that soon. And if you're about to take some of your quilts out of the closet and you know that they're gonna have harsh creases in them, you might want a really great iron to help you get those harsh creases out. And if that's the situation, you might want to check out my video review all about the Reliable Velocity 270 IR iron, which is gonna make that task a breeze. So until then, I'm wishing you flat quilts and I'll see you in the next video.